So, what are some of those common reasons why people won't go 50-50? What are some of the biggest issues about custody that, the two parents involved aren't just like, yeah, we're just going to split our time?
The issues are so personal as to the other parent. I think that's the problem. Is things get muddled. They get cloudy because the parents can't see straight when they're just focused on this other person did something to me in their mind. And so I've got to either do something to them or I've got to prevent them from getting what they want. Very often that's the case. So either one side's feeling that way and it's mucking things up, or both sides feel that way. And that's where the high conflict comes in.
Yeah, I always talk to my clients in my divorce coaching practice about the courts are not where you want to stick it to them, because the problem is the only person that actually suffers is you and your financial situation, because you're spending more money on legal fees, because you're really trying to get back at the person to make them feel the pain by which you're feeling. It comes about what people are trying to do to alleviate their own pain, and they're not thinking about what they're doing to their children in the process. Is that what you see?
Absolutely. It's quite frankly what inspired me to really get into this kind of work is that I saw the research and it's pretty solid by now. There's a lot of it on what happens to kids later on in life when they're in the middle of this kind of a mess. And that's where the ACE kids come into play. And that's what inspired me because the thing is, they're not only suffering in terms of higher suicide rates, higher unemployment, more failed relationships, physical ailments like heart disease and cancer. And that's
Wow.
where it just opened my eyes. And I'm like, wow, I've got to be a part of the solution to this problem rather than part of the problem. Yeah.
So let's take an example. So someone comes to you and it's a couple, and they just said, you know what, we're going to try to mediate because we know that it'll save us money. And if we can even get 60% of the way through mediation, we'll do that. But as the couple enters the space, your mediated space, you realize that one of them had had an affair. So, which is a very common quote unquote event that occurs that is a breaking down of the marriage. And especially one of the individuals is extremely hurt, is experiencing a lot of pain. They feel a lot of betrayal. So, how do you get these two individuals when you know there's been an event to see through the pain they might be experiencing and to refocus their energies on their children?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes we have to work through that fence, so to speak, before we can get anywhere,
Yeah.
because at least one of them is not going to be open to discussing any kind of compromise and what's best for the kids when they still feel like they're the injured party. And violation, we'll just call it, was never acknowledged or owned up to. So
Mhm.
sometimes the first session that I spend with them is getting through that. And if I can get the parent who had the affair to at least, if they even acknowledge that they did, sometimes they don't, but if I can get them to acknowledge it and get them to even to a place of apologizing for it, sometimes the walls just come down and we can move forward. But if that's in the way, we're not likely to make a whole lot of progress.
Yeah. And of course, that's why I got into doing what I do on the coaching side, because we hope to deliver people who have processed some of their emotional divorce before they step into the legal process. So, you have a more free and clear pathway to get them to the finish line, so they're not processing that pain in the while they're making decisions, because then their decisions become emotional decisions,
Yeah,
like you said, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So what happens when, you can't seem to get through that? Like when the two individuals, so we're talking about custody here, we're talking about their children, and one of those individuals just can't seem to see the light, like to see what the importance is of this child having two loving parents in such a huge capacity, part of their lives. Like, how do you get through that? How do you get to an agreement?
Well, sometimes I'm going to have to separate them and talk to them individually. And if it's as you describe, if one party is feeling so hurt that they can't see straight to what's best for the kid, then I'll have a private conversation with them. In our world, it's what's called a caucus. So I'll put, a lot of this stuff's done on Zoom nowadays. So I'll put one parent in the waiting room and I'll talk to the other one privately. And that's confidential. That conversation is confidential. And after we're done with that conversation, they'll give me permission to share either certain aspects of that, what was revealed, or none at all. But what it does is it gives them the opportunity to share what they're going through and feel heard about it. And that really is what it comes down to. A lot of these parties who are stuck, it's because they don't feel like they've been heard, acknowledged. And so if I can do that for them, and that's what we call creating a safe space, then they can sometimes then see, okay, now I can focus on this other thing, which is what's best for our child.
And it must be hard as a mediator because, again, you're not taking a side, right? I know we went through mediation and, they can't really say to you, like, I think you should try for this custody. You can't use this opinionated, you have to be a neutral. So, how do you go about being a neutral in that world?
Yeah, it's a learned practice for sure, because all of us have biases. I mean, judges are supposed to be neutral, but they all have biases. We all know that. So I've gotten better at separating that, reminding myself in the process, because sometimes this stuff touches things in me. Like,
Hmm.
oh, this looks like what I went through, or I know what you're talking about because I, felt that before. And I've got to be careful not to do that unless I feel it can be useful and we're later on in the process and could just get them over the hump, then I can share a personal experience, but I got to be careful when I do that. But to really to get through all that, I'm going to have to make sure that they feel heard. And sometimes I'll say, "This is so you're saying this," and make sure that they agree with my characterization of it. And
Right.
then if they do, then oftentimes then they feel a little freer to be able to share what they want.